modest, conservative, understated title slide here.
The recording is starting now.
Modest, conservative, understated.
Wildemont. That'll do.
Alrighty. Should we kick things off?
Sure.
Okay. John or Sarah, do you typically start things with an agenda, or did you want me to dive straight into?
No, but I'll do the thing. Greetings and welcome. I'm John Sull, co-founder of e-NABLE. With me today is Sarah Gelbard, our coordinator of communications, and Adam Jennings, who will introduce himself in more detail, but who has been doing outreach work with us for close to a year now, and just recently,
in just like a week.
Oh, a year and a week. Okay. And to celebrate his anniversary, we're initiating a consultancy with a new organization he's developed, which frankly is going to drag us into the 2020s with a fresh look at e-NABLE and what all we might do. It's July 17th, summer, so Sarah and I are the audience, but we're going to try to ask questions on behalf of other e-NABLE listeners who might be curious about how this is going to work. So, Adam, I hope we're going to get to see your face as well as your presentation, but it's nice to have you here.
Sure. Let me start video, and my apologies.
There he is.
Not dressed for success. Hi, not dressed for success today. I'm getting into a cold or something.
Where I come from, that looks like dress for success.
Well, sure. Well, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, I suppose. My name is Adam Jennings. I am, and thank you, John, for the introduction. I've been working as e-NABLE's outreach coordinator for the past 10 or 11 months now. I've been part of the e-NABLE community in official capacity for about a year. And for the last 6 months or so, I've been developing a new organization with a partner of mine named Jason Tennyson that we are calling Wildemont. We've registered the LLC in the state of Missouri. e-NABLE is our first official client, and we're very excited to be moving forward with e-NABLE in developing some of our standards and practices, and also expanding e-NABLE's reach and impact in the years ahead. So what Wildemont is, let me just give you a quick overview for anyone who may not have been in attendance for the town halls where we discussed this for the past couple of months, or may not have seen the proposal dropped on Lumio for consideration. Wildemont is comprised of Jason Tennyson and myself. Jason is a nurse by background. He is a sales and marketing expert these days for the past 7 or 8 years. He's worked for a variety of firms, primarily in the healthcare IT space. And currently, his focus is in business analytics and marrying that up with the sales process to develop more streamlined and directed sales experience workflows. My name is Dr. Adam Jennings. I'm there on the bottom half. I am also in a similar vein working in healthcare IT. I'm a physical therapist, though, who specialized in amputee rehabilitation for the majority of my clinical career. I left that space 8 years ago, 7 years ago, to work for the Cerner Corporation based in Kansas City in electronic health records, and have since earned my MBA with an emphasis in process and organizational design. My reason for starting Wildemont was really that Jason and I, after a series of conversations, determined that we had been developing a number of skills that we really weren't able to put into practice in our day-to-day, and we wanted to establish something more akin to a network of organizations that had a compassion and a genuine spirit of doing good in the world and bringing more modern business analytics and intelligence to organizations that otherwise may not have direct access to them. So while we are ourselves not a nonprofit, Wildmont is really designed with nonprofits at the forefront, or barring nonprofits, organizations that have a sort of global improvement focus, a humanitarian focus. So as I've just stated, our mission and vision is to reach out to organizations as they face periods of adjustment, really trying to find ways to turn challenges and situations which may put organizations onto the back foot into a position to identify new opportunities for growth and change. And again, trying to reach out to organizations primarily with an emphasis in compassion, inclusivity, and sustainable growth. So how do we do this? I don't think I need to go through bullet by bullet. I'm really more excited to talk about what Wildmont is going to be doing for e-NABLE. I will say, I'll run through this really quickly. If you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me at either my e-NABLE email address or my Wildmont address. Probably for Wildmont purposes, it would be easier for me to keep track of things if you reach out to me at adam@wildmont.com. I'll have the email address down at the end, but you can always email me for any outreach concerns at adam@e-NABLE.org. But really what we do is try to apply the same kind of analytics to each of our clients that we would be observing within any given project that we would have for that client. So we start by establishing a baseline understanding about what the organization is trying to accomplish, what its makeup is, how it's structured, what its hierarchy is. Obviously, e-NABLE is kind of a unique case. e-NABLE doesn't have a hierarchy per se. So part of what we will be doing is attempting to design structures and a framework, a mechanism that can get work done with group energy without having that kind of traditional top-down hierarchy that you might see in a more, a more traditional organization or nonprofit. We apply evidence-based strategy. We're really focused on collaboration, and having come out of MBA school, I am just chock full of jargon like collab. But collaboration means a very specific thing in my world, and what that means is attempting to create actual connections between members of a given group and finding ways to highlight the skills and interests of those individuals in a way that work in concert with one another. And all of that is to attain sustainable impact. We're trying to make sure that whatever changes we identify for e-NABLE will be of a lasting significance and have some kind of positive change, depending upon what the metrics that we're attempting to identify are. The three areas where Wildmont has been retained, we start every exercise with a base camp activity. So base camp is attempting to establish that foundational, that baseline understanding about what the organization is, where they're positioned in a given industry, what their goals are, their mission and vision. And then from there, we can extend into other activities. The two programs that Wildmont will be applying for e-NABLE are our REACH campaign and an impact management program. REACH is primarily focused on, it's more akin to traditional marketing. So trying to increase brand awareness, trying to elevate a given organization's profile within the landscape that they operate. And the impact side is more interested in specific project work. We are trying to work down a list of priorities, identify exactly what it is the organization is attempting to accomplish, and then specific a plan and a framework to accomplish those goals. Any questions so far, John? I know this is all stuff you already know, but okay, we'll keep moving. again, this is really just standard stuff. How we attempt to implement change. We work at the individual team and enterprise level. Again, e-NABLE doesn't have a traditional framework. This is going to be interesting in the months ahead, attempting to identify, what teams are and what the enterprise is, because even the people who are most active in this organization, the people who are typically in attendance in this Friday town halls, I don't think come close to comprising the potential that we might call an enterprise. I think we've got potentially thousands of members who may want to be more engaged on an operational level. So it'll be really interesting as we begin working out to people, especially through the chapter leaders. Hopefully in the months ahead, more chapter leaders are interested in participating in this exercise, and we can see how we can define and empower a network of individuals who may want to step into leadership roles once this enterprise activity starts kicking off. Well, to help it to kick off. So as part of our base camp exercise, what do we identify with e-NABLE? Obviously, I'm in a, I have an advantage in having started with e-NABLE about a year ago. I have a pretty intimate understanding about how the organization has functioned and what its general framework and goals are. But as I see it, if you look on that bottom left-hand side, the major things that e-NABLE has going for it is it's very successful in providing resources and community support to individuals. e-NABLE has created a real community of people who can ask questions, who can participate in design work, and work iteratively to attempt to create better and better devices that individual people who access e-NABLE's resources can utilize to fabricate devices on a one-to-one basis. And all of that is made possible through that social hub. I think the hub is really the big win of e-NABLE, as much as people cracking your own about it. I think that it works pretty well as a way to make sure that everyone's on the same playing field, that everyone has access to the same information, and there are no barriers, paywalls, anything for anyone who wants to make use of this technology. They can. I also think that it's really great that we utilize the Illumio platform, that democratic platform for allocating funds. We also have some baseline annual corporate commits and individual commitments from individuals on a recurring basis to support high value projects. However, there's a flip side to that, which we'll get into in just a little bit on the challenges side. Any questions, John or Sarah? Okay, so key challenges right now. What is it that we're really looking at? Why is Wildmont here, honestly? The number one thing is our operational and administrative support. We have an organization of thousands that are really not locked around any kind of discernible roles. And we're made up primarily of makers who are more interested in doing good, doing the work of printing a device and getting it to a person than they are on working on the background infrastructure to make sure that there's some kind of, there's some system in place to help a large number of people to accomplish that fabrication and delivery more effectively. So we are locked. We have low engagement and feedback. This should be a second bullet. Oh, no, there we go. That's fine. Yeah, we have low engagement and feedback from our community generally. We also have low enrollment. We have low participation from individuals from healthcare backgrounds. And we'll go into this a little bit later, low engagement from individuals who are actually amputees or individuals with limb loss. We also have a mismatch between the size of our community. We've got thousands of makers and access to people who have need of these devices. Obviously, this is something that we've talked about quite a lot in town halls the past year, and I'm sure prior to my joining. But that is another thing where Wildmont will be jumping in to identify some routes forward to mitigate that. In fact, we've got some things just this week, just today, in fact, that will be helping to increase opportunity there. We also have an inadequate funding pipeline to support broader member-driven initiatives. That's the flip side of that coin I alluded to earlier. We do have some annual corporate commits, and it's amazing that we've had that. Honestly, that's what allowed Wildmont to join on by having the fund that we do. However, one of Wildmont's key initiatives will be attempting to locate additional corporate sponsors and partners who can lend their, we'll call it energy, their monetary energy to make e-NABLE a little bit more, a little better positioned to support a broader array of initiatives from the community. I think that if we had a real culture where it was a lot easier for people to join on and say, hey, this is the thing I want to do, and we didn't have to worry so much about hitting a zero balance, I think that we might see a lot more engagement from folks. So just a thought, which we'll go into a lot more detail later. And then finally, we really need more varied perspectives. This is something that Sarah and I and other individuals have been talking about quite a lot in recent months. We need more healthcare workers, people who, especially specialists like in PTOT and medicine and prosthetists, if we can get them. I've made a couple of inroads in contacting leaders in the prosthetics worlds in the United States, but yeah, there's a lot more work to be done there. We also want to reach out to lawmakers, state reps, people at the federal level, anyone who might have influence on making sure that we're not running afoul of, not influence, but people who could have insight and perspective to make sure that as we potentially expand into other avenues, that we don't run afoul of any legal or regulatory standards. And then finally, we really need to see if there are individuals or groups who are interested in nonprofit management, or, I'm thinking high school organizations, Rotary clubs that may want to donate time to facilitating some of these back-end processes that are where e-NABLE has traditionally struggled. Before I move on, any questions there?
No, so far so good. By the way, I've been on mute, but I'm not now, so I will now answer your questions audibly.
Great. Okay, so this is something that this is really where I started at last Friday's town hall. What we need to do, in my opinion, before we get too deep in the weeds in identifying goals and setting metrics that we'd like to measure against, are answer a few basic questions. And in a couple of hours here, I'm going to post a poll on the hub. I wanted to have this meeting with a couple of the chapter leaders before posting it there. But I really want to get a better sense for what e-NABLE thinks it is. How do we define ourselves, and how do our members communicate the role that they fill sort of in their, obviously in every country it's going to be a little bit different. But I really want to have some kind of guiding light, some kind of, overarching idea about what e-NABLE is, which will in turn make it a lot easier for us to, design programs that we can pursue that are in line with that sort of overarching mission and vision. Obviously, I think, that these are kind of ubiquitous in the educational and business worlds, but they really do serve a pretty defensible purpose of helping an organization, especially one as loosely connected as ours is, to be a little bit more focused in this group project work. So how do we define and measure success for our network? What is our mission? How do we define our vision that supports the mission? Or rather, how do we define the vision that the mission works toward? And then once we've defined our goals, how do we generate the time, the money, and the resources to accomplish them? What are the avenues that we take to accomplish that? What Wildmont will be doing for this first quarter of this engagement for Q3 of 2023. Number one, we're going to attempt to engage and energize the e-NABLE community. That is identifying outreach campaigns, trying to open up opportunities for leadership positions. I've actually already reached out to a couple of individuals who have expressed interest in a couple of areas in some specific project work. In my next slide, or maybe the slide after the next one, I have a process flow diagram, which I shared on Friday, that each segment of which will require people to step and do a couple of leadership roles to develop some better design processes. And again, apologies for this cold. But once we've defined those things, I think we're going to find in the ensuing months and quarters that we're going to have a lot more capacity to handle more detailed and expansive project work once we've built up a little bit of community leadership. We also want to seek and secure new funding sources and partnerships. Jason is, my partner Jason is going to be leading up that initiative. He has already made a couple of inroads, and then John and Jeremy are going to be meeting with Jason and maybe me later this week to talk about e-NABLE's history with corporate sponsors and how we can maybe leverage some of our existing network to
what if you could do
that into.
Sorry, that was
a question.
Forget it.
Oh, pop up, no problem. It's all good. It sounded like a real question. I thought someone had joined the call. Yeah, so Jason will be leading up that, and we'll talk briefly about that in just a moment. And then on the subject of specific project work, and I realize I'm blathering a lot. I can go all day. So if anyone has a question, just pop in and let me know. But
I think Adam, I have a suggestion. It's a great presentation. I'd like you to make it available to everybody. But my sense of our users is that this is a good reference. What I think I'd like you to show us is less focused on sort of what Wildemont will do, and more. So for example, first thing is to identify a mission and a vision. So let's talk about that. I think maybe we can model some of the process. So let me ask you this: we've had sort of a vague and implicit mission and vision for quite some time, and we have a loosely distributed network of autonomous chapters. How do you imagine we're going to converge on a mission and vision?
Yeah, so I think that with the framework that we currently have in place at e-NABLE, I think that the best thing to do would be to establish, or would be to explore this through some established routes, starting on the hub. Was my thought, starting with a couple of polls might be a good way to feel out where people land if they have strong opinions about that kind of thing. Okay. And then, so basically what I would be doing would be, what I plan to do starting later today, would be to just put out an open call for people who have an interest or a thought about what the mission and vision might be. I was going to toss out a couple of examples, but I have an idea. I actually have landed on a mission and vision that I like, but I don't want to share that because I don't want to put my thumb on the scales and influence what the community might want to put out there. Okay. So once we have gotten crowdsourced a couple of thoughts for possibles, I'll turn that into a separate poll and allow the community to vote on either on the hub or on Lumio. I don't know if maybe Lumio might be. I know Lumio is specifically for like funding initiatives, but
not necessarily. We can figure that out. Okay, so I think that's great. So yep. We're going to use the hub as the forum. Now that we've gotten there, I'm going to suggest that we also need to market out to the various Facebook groups because they may not be monitoring the hub.
That's a good point. Let me make a note of that.
Sarah can help with that. But this is the point. We are a far-flung community, and yet this is a once-in-a-decade opportunity for us to converge and just sort of update and refresh who we are. So let's imagine that step has been done. At some point, we have what sounds like a good explicit mission and vision. And we probably use Lumio or the hub to ratify that. And that decision about how to proceed can happen through the hub and through town hall meetings. Okay.
Yeah, I think that sounds great.
Then what happens?
Well, I suppose really, I don't want Wildmont to be in a position where we're dictating each step of the way with this. I think that the town halls are a great opportunity for the community to voice their opinions and try to put their ideas out. And I would hope that having and I really don't want to disparage the work of the town halls, because honestly, I think e-NABLE is still going in the capacity that it is, because the town halls have been hosted so regularly. But I think that the subject matter has maybe been less substantive than it could be, in that we could be, I think there's an opportunity to put out a lot more of this, larger scale operational discussion, and making sure people are aware that where these things are discussed and decisions are made are at town hall meetings. We already have the established cadence. We already have a methodology for notifying people when certain topics of discussion are going to be coming up. So making sure that the invite is available and that folks have, have the ability to join, I think would be the best place to identify next steps.
Well, that's great. One thing to have in mind is that for this to succeed, and if there are going to be a bunch of people at the town hall meeting or attending the town hall meeting, and I think it's possible for us to monitor both YouTube attendance and real-time town hall attendance. And once we've got those people, we may well want to change the way we conduct the town hall meetings. Our current methodology is based on the fact that a small number of people are there, and we've dealt with nitty-gritty, and we tend to give long-winded answers. You might want to think about some sort of interactive or parallel process, like heavily using the chat in order to give everybody a chance to contribute and not just listen to whoever happens to be monologuing at the time.
Sure. Zoom does have a lot of audience participation functionality inbuilt. There are polls that can be thrown out in Zoom. There, things as simple as like the hand raise tool, if we wanted to keep it really stripped down to indicate agreement or disagreement with a given idea. So yeah, that's certainly something worth exploring. But we'll cross that bridge when we come to it.
So listen,
try to get more people to attend first.
Right. So forgive me if I've derailed your presentation. If you want
not at all.
If you want to page through it, so I know where you were going to go, that would be helpful. But as you can see, I'm sort of trying to boil it down to simple presentation of the actions that we anticipate, and to begin the process. But why don't you just sort of give me an overview of this presentation?
Sure.
There we go.
One thing that there are two things that I really wanted to focus on in giving examples of what Wildmont's going to be doing. Number one, and this was something that I was hoping to talk to a bit more of the chapter leadership about, because this is really the big thing that I'm planning to head up, in addition to assisting and revamping the website and sort of bringing the matching platform, the hub, and our voting platform all into kind of one package. But really, it's this holistic process. Right now, I think that the e-NABLE model, as it currently stands, is a single step. I shouldn't disparage it. It's a linear process, I should say. We have a person joins the community. They want to print a device. Either they found someone, or usually they haven't. But eventually, if they are fortunate enough to get matched up to a potential recipient, giving away the use.
But your point is good. The next slide, I think, makes this point.
Sure. Yeah. So really, they get access to a design. They print the device. They deliver it to a person. End of transaction. I'd like to take that and incorporate it into a more cohesive, positive feedback loop. So with the new website that I alluded to a moment ago, I'll be working with Azure. Actually, I think tomorrow, Jeremy and I are meeting with Azure to start looking at the new site, the new matching platform, and seeing what we need to outline steps to hopefully get that live within a few months. I don't think that would be too big of a list, but then again, most of the work is going to be on Azure, so I don't want to speak on his behalf.
Okay.
But in short, we're going to break this into 5 discrete steps if this is something that the community agrees with. My thought is that we begin with identifying need, that is funneling people where they want to go based on what they're trying to accomplish. When they access e-NABLE.org, there will be a clear branching where if you are a potential recipient or representative of a recipient, a potential maker, someone who wants to get involved on the operational side, that would be someone who would come to work for me, work on my team, not for me, obviously, but just who would assist with outreach initiatives and trying to do less on the making side and more on the, making e-NABLE work side. And then there would be anyone interested in learning about e-NABLE, either for, public relations needs, for sponsorship inquiries, those kinds of things. So once a person has been identified, and using this example as a potential recipient, let's say that from there a maker and a recipient are paired, that moves into device pairing and fabrication. The recipient then will be working with the maker as a member of the team. The maker will have the tools that they require, and will hopefully have the confidence to reach out to the recipient's care team with the recipient's permission. They'll provide them with pre-built educational materials about the device and also about just some basic safety precautions when using a device like this. Obviously, these aren't medical devices, so we're not attempting to blur that line, but there's some things that I think we need to do just to maintain due diligence to make sure that we're doing what we need to prevent injury. Then also, for the purpose of ongoing improvement, performing pre-device checkpoints, checking range of motion, providing surveys to the recipient to get a better sense for what their current functional level is, so that after the device is given, then we can retest or resurvey and get a better sense for how that device has changed their ability over time.
I think
From
that's
device
great.
pairing
I think
and
this diagram, I don't think there's any question that this diagram captures what we should have. And so I'm impatiently going to say, let's page through, because the question is, how do we get there? I don't think, I think it's worth checking, but I don't think anyone is going to deny that this is what we want. The question is, how are we going to get there?
Sure. So the next step, I don't have a slide detailing this really, it's just I had planned to talk through, but for each of these steps in this diagram, the idea is to lift up community members who are well matched in experience to take on some leadership role, with Wildmont attempting to steer to create a more cohesive flow from one bucket of responsibility to the next. So for example, under device pairing and fabrication, Tainara is going to be really influential in creating guidelines and materials to make sure that both medical professionals have what they need to understand the 3D printing process and what these devices are, and makers have what they need to understand what healthcare is and who to reach out to and how, how to reach out to the person's care team, what the jargon, the terminology is. Under waivers and media, Sarah and I have talked about this. Given her journalism background, I think that she would be a great person to take charge in developing some collateral there. But for each of these steps, trying to find leadership and then sub-leaders to execute on these discrete outcomes is really the way to go. On that last step, that process, fundraising, fundraising pipelines. Jason, for the time being, unless and until e-NABLE gets to the point where it's a little bit more self-sufficient, this is probably priority number 1 or 2, just to justify our ongoing existence as an e-NABLE partner.
Sure.
We want to make sure that we more than pay for ourselves. We don't want to drain the fund and then, whatever projects we've done, even if we're wildly successful elsewhere, if we haven't found additional fundraising sources, we haven't done our job.
Okay,
so Jason is looking.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think
no, please.
I think this is great. Page back, please.
Sure.
So for identifying need, who do you see as the leader of that node?
Generally for this sphere? Honestly, for the time being, myself. I'll be taking point on this one.
Great. Yep. The red box, device pairing and fabrication, is Tainara. Device provision and follow-up, are you the stand-in for that?
Possibly. That's one where I think people who have more technical know-how about the devices themselves would likely be best. But certainly for post-delivery, actually, I've got a meeting scheduled today and another tomorrow, both with physical therapists who are amputee rehab specialists who are interested in joining e-NABLE, who I think could be really helpful in that sphere too.
Okay, great. So by the way, I reached out to Melvin Cruz from Honduras, who has got a great deal of technical device provision expertise. So he'll be a piece there. We have never had someone who is really good and successful at follow-up. But I think that's sort of in your skill set, right? So
yeah, I think part of that comes back to the site. Honestly, I think that we need really easily. That's why that's kind of step number 1, because that directs traffic where it needs to go.
Okay.
For follow-up, for device provision, for funding, all of it. So that's kind of step 1.
Waivers and media is Sarah, and fundraising is Jason. I acknowledge that we're interested in bringing new bodies into play here, but for the moment, I think you've got a fairly full deck of people who can kickstart the process. So that's great.
Sure.
Again, the follow-up piece is the one that I think is the gap, but you've identified a way that we can work towards filling it. Who's going to really be able to take the lead on follow-up? And by the way, I wouldn't be at all surprised if that turns out to be something that we can't count on volunteers to lead. But that's
Sure.
down the road. Okay, next slide, please.
You got it.
And I hope you don't mind that I'm sort of trying to streamline this presentation to get to the core issues. So this we've looked at.
No, you're fine.
I think Jason will be great at this. Next slide.
Sure. There you go.
Okay. All right. Okay, great. So now, is there anything I steamrolled through that you just want to say because I steamrolled you through?
No, you're good. I think that honestly, John, we've brought up all of these subjects at town halls for the past couple of months now. If people want additional detail, I believe all of those recordings are still in the hub. Okay. I would just say that something that I failed to mention at the last town hall after approval was granted for this partnership was I wanted to acknowledge we had a couple of people voice concern on Lumio about the cost here, and I understand that even though we're discounting our services quite a bit, it's still a cost. The reason fundraising is top of mind for me is obviously because we want to create an environment where e-NABLE is able to pursue more focused objectives, right. But also because I joined e-NABLE as an opportunity for me to leverage some of my interest in working with amputees and leveraging my physical therapy background. It was not in any level something that I wanted to manipulate into an income stream for myself. But to get a hold of Jason's expertise in a sustainable way, and I think to make this a more how do I put this? A more focused exercise.
Yeah.
I think that this partnership seems like a pretty valid way to go. So really, top of mind for me is making sure that the expense that Wildmont is incurring pays for itself. That we're able to return
Right.
whatever we're taking from the bank.
I appreciate that, and I think that in the long run, we're going to drain the kitty very quickly if
Right.
you don't do that. And yet, if you do it, I think there's a longer term plan that will be possible. So, I think you should. You didn't vote yourself in. We voted you in. And now it's up to all of us collectively to make it be demonstrably worthwhile. I don't think you should feel any need to apologize. Having said that,
Well,
is there anything else you can't resist making sure it's covered?
We'll be starting. We'll be working with Jeremy to get the Trello board up and running as soon as possible. Trello, for those who aren't aware, is a project management solution. It's browser-based for a pretty low tier level, a subscription level, which e-NABLE currently owns. You're able to create and manage a number of different tracking boards, which are highly customizable with automation built in, that allows community members at e-NABLE to clearly visualize what tasks are active, what stage they're currently in, and where we could use assistance. I'm hoping we can use Trello, especially in this once we get out of this initial phase and start moving into the next couple of months, to make sure people are aware of where they can jump into a process if they have the skills. But if there's one call to action that I would ask anyone viewing this recording to leap on, it would be to leverage your network to make them aware of this partnership. Obviously, I want this to be successful for a couple of different reasons, but really my overarching goal is to turn e-NABLE into an organization that lasts. I think it's lasted a full decade already. I think that it has the potential to last decades longer, but we need to be a little bit adaptable. Technology is going to continue to change. The healthcare landscape is going to continue to change, and globally, there's going to be changing need in terms of what the newest technology of the day is able to provide. So whether that is expanding into, using, video conferencing technology as part of what we do, if there's new additive manufacturing techniques or bionic technology that becomes largely available for folks, or if our fund expands greatly and we can begin paying for members to print things and ship them to specific outreach destinations, like in Kenya, Kabul, other places we're currently working on. I think people should really pay attention to where we are now if they have any interest in staying engaged with this organization, because the more interest, the more activity we have, the more likely it will be for this to be a going concern 10 years from now.
I think those are good points, and it makes me realize that there's a strategic issue we haven't really talked about. One is, are we doing this on behalf of, let's call it e-NABLE United States, which is the e-NABLE we, present company, are most familiar with, and is frankly not typical of e-NABLE globally. That is, e-NABLE United States, for example, has got some of these problems that you've already identified and that you are taking steps to address. I don't think e-NABLE France has these problems. They're doing quite well. Similarly for Turkey, they have other problems. So the question is whether we are trying to do rejuvenate e-NABLE US, B, create resources for e-NABLE globally, or C, both. I suspect it's both.
My hope is that it's both. And I would say that I don't think that, we're not going to make the decision on e-NABLE's behalf. But I think that it's in the community's best interest to have a a global mechanism in place that supports every organization within it. But
well, I
think
think that's right. But part of what that means is that your outreach is going to have to, your information gathering is going to have to include becoming more familiar than we now are with what is the current state of our chapters. Chapters come and go. And so the ones that I knew well when I was deeply into this, let's say 5 years ago, some of them are still going strong, like the ones I mentioned, and some of them have sort of faded. I had occasion just today to notice that there are a number of new e-NABLE chapters that have popped up on Facebook. I don't know their status. So it seems to me there actually are several categories of chapters, and Sarah, I think, is beginning to do some research on this, but I'm just surfacing this as an important part of your data gathering phase. I think there are chapters that are doing just well, thank you. And yet we should know more about who they are. I think there are lots of aspirational chapters. Some of them are in the high schools, and some of them are just individuals who popped up and said, this is really cool, I want to do this. They fall into two categories. I'm making this up as I go along, but I'm pretty confident about this. One is people who said, this is cool, and it would look good on my resume, and are not really going to be in a position to follow through. That's okay. I mean, yeah, we've had a number of high school kids, for example, who say, this is great, I'm going to do this. And then, being high school kids, they move on to something else. We've had a number of other high school kids who have turned out to be superheroes. Those superheroes are the ones we want to identify and make sure that they get the sustenance they need to fill their full potential. But how we identify them, I think, is a good question for you. There are also chapters and communities that aren't even well enough defined. For example, there isn't, to my knowledge yet, an e-NABLE chapter in Afghanistan, but you're creating an opportunity for maybe not a chapter, or maybe a chapter, but for underutilized volunteers from all over the world, but in particular, I think the United States, to begin contributing to people elsewhere.
Yeah.
So I think just sort of identifying those sort of clusters may be really important. Now, we can't necessarily serve all the clusters we can imagine, but I do think that we're heterogeneous enough that there are multiple clusters, and that segmenting the e-NABLE community into those clusters might help us decide which ones we want to address and how. And that
makes sense.
The nature of the community is such that we can't simply say, tell us about yourselves, because some of them are not going to show up even though they are out there. So really pursuing ones that we suspect are there, as you've done in Afghanistan, as would be done if we looked at the new chapters that have popped up, or the new people that have joined the hub, are ways of doing that. I have one other suggestion for you. And again, this is just because we have an opportunity to do this brainstorming, and because I want other people who may be listening to this to feel free to write to me and you and Sarah saying, one thing you didn't mention is X. Also, I want to point out that there aren't many people listening to this. So that's the real challenge, right? Is how do we get to those other groups that are out there? Now, can I remember the additional point I wanted to make? Apparently not.
That's all right.
Okay, that'll probably come back to me.
That's all right. You can always email
Okay,
me.
but so that was a riff on segmenting and identifying these clusters and probing rather than simply asking, right? Sort of reaching out to particular individuals. I did remember the one other thing. We still have people joining the hub at a relatively high rate. That says we are, right, there are new people every week from a variety of countries. Those people, until they're jaded or until they've been distracted and get onto something else, I think are a really rich source of information. Systematically emailing new people who join the hub, or possibly taking a group of them and inviting them to a focus group to find out who they are, what brought them there in 2023, might be really useful. Because they are not set in their ways yet. And so that was the other thing I wanted to mention.
I do reach out
That's
to
excellent.
members and invite them to new member meetings. If you have other ideas about how to engage new members in different ways, I'd
Well, it's a good point,
good to hear.
because you're not getting that big a response from them, right?
Right.
Sarah, we can work together to see if there's anything I can do to help support that. To John's point, to pursue.
Yep. It could be that we should. I'm sorry. I was just going to say it may.
No, go ahead.
It may be that we should start asking new registrants to give phone numbers not for public consumption, and then we pick up the phone and we talk to them. But Adam is right. I think as you guys work on it, we're gonna get more aggressive about it. Or it could be that it's too easy for people to sign on to the hub if they're not really serious. Getting to the bottom of that is a good idea.
Sure. Anything else?
Yeah. My advice to you, Adam, is to be, and I'll take the heat for this, is to be a little less diligent about about making sure that you don't step on toes, and being more experimental and aggressive about trying things. You know, the typical consultant's approach, which, by the way, I think works better in an established organization, is to say, okay, we need to start with data gathering, and then we're going to give you a complex report and so on. And then in a typical organization, the boss has said, talk to this guy, and all the employees roll their eyes. The boss then gets a report, and often it goes onto a shelf. We're not that organization, right? If you write a complicated report, it's going to go to the same people, Jeremy and me and Sarah and you and a few other people who may take a look at it. And we already have talked about this a lot. So I think, and I'm not saying you're not doing this, but identifying changes that are worth making sooner and then trying them. Like, for example, trying to raise funds or trying to find out who's joining the hub, just as two top of mind issues, may be more valuable to begin now than to wait for an information gathering process. Because I think you've already got your hands on most of the low-hanging informational fruit. We're going to need to shake the tree to get some more fruit to work with.
Okay. That sounds good. And I apologize. I've got a meeting in 1 minute with this prosthetist in Kenya. So I'd like to hop off for that. But thank you all for the time. If anyone does listen to this, and if you have questions moving forward, please feel free to email me at adam@wildmod.com.